Thanks, and thanks for having me on again. I think yeah, it's been a number of years since we've been catching. I think every time we catch up, both of us have got a different role. So we're both evolving through the industry. But yeah, my name's Nick Hewson. I'm a structural engineer by background. I've worked in the UK and then moved to Australia in 2010. So always had a kind of interest and passion in timber and learned that in the UK. And then moving to Australia when it was just sort of starting to pick up here, the idea of CLT and mass timber was still very, very new. We hadn't built anything really at scale at that point. So I sort of worked through consultant engineering. I worked for XLAM in timber manufacture for about 5 years, and then I worked for a prefab company doing timber prefab, the Verity Group in Sydney for another 2.5 years. So I kind of really had that design for manufacture and assembly experience through different businesses, and now for coming up to a year now, I started my own company called Arbораlis. So we're focused on all things timber, looking at mass timber buildings and at lightweight prefabricated buildings as well. So really consulting across a real broad range of projects, from everything from sort of backyard granny flats up to multi-story office towers. So, working either providing structural engineering services or advice around, procurement, design, doing temporary works, and also get involved a lot in industry conversations and research. So I'm still heavily involved in a lot of discussions around new codes, research, design standards. So yeah, really very broad, which is exciting, keeps me entertained, and there's a lot of really interesting work happening in the timber space at the moment, and it's great to be part of that.
Yeah, and you were part of the Start, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Start House project, right? Were you part of that one all like 10 years ago?
I had some involvement on that, very early days at a sort of limited capacity, but it was quite interesting kind of coming out of university. So I joined a small boutique company called Technica, so small boutique engineers in London. It just so happened that the same kind of time I was starting, we built up a relationship with KLH UK. So they were looking to kind of get into the market in Australia, and we're looking for some office space. So Karl-Heinz Weiss, who I know has been on your show as well before and be well known to a lot of people in the timber industry in Australia. So I think described himself as my timber dad. So he taught me everything there is to know about CLT. I think when I was just setting out, we really got a kind of front row seat to the sort of take up of mass timber and CLT in particular in the UK. So worked on a number of projects in those early days, and the Stadthaus and Kingsdale School, and a few other kind of domestic projects. So really kind of amazing way to learn the new materials sort of direct. We were still having to have German codes translated and things because it was still so new to us. So it was pretty fun time, and really kickstarted my career in this timber space, and it's been a wonderful part of the industry to be involved in.
Yeah, well, 100%. And yeah, 10 years, it'd be really interesting to know how in your design meetings 10 years ago on a project like Stadthaus and today, are we dealing with the quite similar problems? We'll drill down on some, challenges or things that might be worthy of the attention today. But how has it evolved, and everyone's attention been in solving problems up until now?
It's changed hugely, and I think the level of kind of the sophistication over some of the conversations has obviously increased. Like when you're first starting to talk about this new materials, and you tell people that you want to build 10-story apartment buildings out of timber, they look at you like you're crazy, and you start to explain it, and you start to sort of show pictures of the products and how it all goes together, and people sort of get it. And you sort of talk about it as being this like here sort of kit of parts, or tilt up timber, so replacing precast concrete with timber. So you kind of naturally have to sort of get the kind of point across by making analogies with other materials and things like that, and so people start to understand it. I think we've seen a lot more nuance in the discussion in the last sort of 5 to 10 years as people start to get more familiar with the material and start to understand how to design it, how to treat it, how to manufacture it, where some of those sweet spots are, where it works well, where it doesn't work so well. So I look at fire as an example, and we often talk about these big massive sections, and you just design it to char rates, and the timber chars at this predictable rate, and that provides the fire protection. And at a kind of basic level, that's somewhat true, but when you start to get into discussions around fire dynamics and self-extinguishment, and there's a lot more kind of nuance that goes into those fire engineering discussions than just kind of char rates. So I think we're obviously still kind of new in this space, and that discussion's maturing, but it's certainly kind of changed a lot in the last 5 to 10 years. So which is great to see, becoming more and more accepted and more well known in the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting that we are new, but the nuance, there's so much nuance, it seems. And I've noticed, I know you'd probably be the same, consider you, without putting words in your mouth, but a lot of people who are experts consider themselves as beginners in this space. You know what I mean? Those who I feel like who don't consider themselves beginners are the opposite. I don't know if it's a thing I've noticed in the industry itself, and maybe a beginner's mindset being part of the toolkit. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think there's a lot more to it than people realize. I talk about this sort of these eye-opening moments in my career, and I'd spent years as a structural engineer, and starting to specialize in mass timber, and thought I knew a lot about it, and then moving to the supply side, and coming on board at a supplier like XLAM. You had this sort of epiphany moment where you realize actually it's a lot more complicated than maybe I realized, and there's a different kind of lens that you view things over when you're on that manufacturing side to maybe when you're in the design side, and understanding that complete sort of journey from seedling to log to materials coming into the factory, how that's all manufactured, how it's put together, all the sort of these big macro elements and the micro elements of adhesives, and how you prepare the timber before you glue it, and the quality assurance, and all that sort of really fine detail that you don't get experience in a consultancy, and similarly then going from XLAM to Viridi, and going to get much more exposure to that manufacturing value add construction sort of side of it, and all the other sort of products that go alongside the timber, and how they all kind of interact with it. You start to realize that sort of matrix of interactions and things becomes so much more complicated, and there's so much more to juggle. So I'm a big advocate for designers and the likes to take any opportunity they can to visit manufacturers, to visit sites, to spend a lot of time. I talk about some of the best learning I ever had was going to the original kind of XLAM factory in New Zealand, and seeing some projects that we'd had a hand in go through the factory, and seeing how where the bottlenecks were, and where the people were struggling to kind of keep up with production, because some of the detailing was fussy, or it was taking a lot of time to manufacture certain details. So I think that whole kind of DFMA perspective, I think is absolutely critical to success. And I think let's say that number of factors that play into that are so huge, and I'm still learning new things about it every day. So it's incredibly rewarding, but it's a challenging thing to try to balance all that.
Yeah, and you mentioned something like a connection detail might cause bottlenecks in the factory and ultimately drive cost up in one way or another for that project, or all projects as cost models develop from a supplier's point of view. And so there's so many of those little things, but where are we applying, are we setting ourselves up for projects right? Or how can we set ourselves up? Because pretty much every profession I have on the podcast, they want to be on the meeting at first. You know what I mean? Like you say to an acoustics, an installer, the supplier, the engineer, like, is that what we should do? Or should there be more of a timber generalist who sort of touches on all of them? How should we best set ourselves up to achieve project success from that point of view?
It's a really good question, because I think we're wrestling with it as a business on a number of projects, and I will say there's no one solution to everything. Every project will have sort of unique drivers. Like where I sort of see the value in my experience, and like what we're trying to offer through Arboralis is to sort of particularly get on board at that early stage, and help to plug some of the gaps and some of that sort of understanding that sort of born out of the decade plus of experience working in this space, and knowing where some of those sort of some of the kind of areas of conflict between different disciplines, and how to balance some of the demands of acoustics and fire and structure, and being able to hone in on some of those key areas and say, look, there's a big amount of cost or risk or something in these particular areas, so let's focus on these, let's try and solve these, and sometimes getting the right team on board, getting the right engineers, fire engineers, acoustic consultants is really good. I think also kind of offering advice in that space, just off my experience, and sometimes when we've got a kind of early stage project, and it can be a lot of money to kind of get a full team of consultants on board to sort of work through some very preliminary sort of concepts. That's absolutely where I think there's some sort of space for more of a kind of timber generalist to support in there, and try to hone in on those solutions early, and then bring in kind of other consultants and stuff down the track. So certainly seeing some interest from clients in that space, trying to help them at the early days, and set the project up in the right way.
Mm. And we've got a lot of the consultants like fire, acoustic, structure, sustainability. And I know this is a topic that you've spoken about at a recent conference, and you've quite interested in. But I don't really see any like moisture or durability consultants on the team. So, tell us about this issue, and how how important is it, and everything like that.
Sure. Now I'm sort of somewhat independent from suppliers and things. I'm sort of trying to take a little bit of a lead here. Like, I think we've definitely been sleeping on sort of moisture and durability a bit in the industry. I think there's a really big focus on fire and fire compliance and testing and things early days. Particularly as we were trying to sort of forge ahead, and sort of build those early mass timber buildings. But the reality, I look at it to say, well, the chances of there being fire in the building of significant volume, that significant intensity, that it's going to cause a kind of a really significant issue is so infinitesimally small. But it's there's a 100% chance that it's going to rain on your building. There's some studies out of I think it's the University of Sydney, or one of the Sydney unis was talking about the apartment buildings that we've built in the last 20 years in Australia, and the statistic was something they thought somewhere between sort of 70 to 90% of apartment buildings built in the last 20 years had a leak somewhere. Whether it's in a roof terrace, or a roof, or a bathroom or something. So it's not a kind of if case of if we're going to have a leak at some point in a building, and it's a when, really. So I think we need to acknowledge the fact that a timber building, if there is a leak, or some water issues with it, like the consequences of that are potentially larger than if it's potentially a concrete building. So we need to have an appropriate response to that. And I'm a very big advocate for a very robust approach to timber and moisture. And as you say, like there is no kind of moisture durability consultant yet. Like, the way that the construction industry is going, everything becomes more and more specialized, and, more and more, professions start to kind of appear to fill in these gaps. And maybe that is something that happens in the future, but it's something that I think is currently kind of slipping through the gaps a bit. There's no really clear consultant, I think, that sort of bears responsibility for it. So it's often a case that it kind of gets passed a bit down the line, and everyone just sort of tries to cover themselves with a specification or a note or something, a drawing, and it gets left to the builder often, or the installer to try to manage that. But I think there's definitely better ways to be doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to drill down further on that, like responsibilities, how does that go through from supplier through to installation? And, how could it sit in terms of who, maybe not who, using the word should might not be the word, but who's probably best placed to take responsibility for each step there, and what sort of plans can be in place, like practical things that teams can do to sort of set themselves up right here?
Yeah, I think, look, to me, it should start from the client. Like, the client needs to be, when they're considering a timber building, they need to be, putting that in their requests for tender from their consultants, that this is a focus. And I think if it's a lay client who hasn't necessarily done a timber building before, then it's probably incumbent on the design team to sort of back brief them and say that this is something that we think needs to be included and allowed for. So we are going to allow for a specific process to address this. And I think it's probably sits somewhere between the architect and the engineer, the structural engineer, I should say. So and also the facade, sort of building envelope type consultant as well. So what I'm trying to advocate for is in the same way that we take a safety and design approach for safety, we do the moisture and design approach. So we take a kind of systematic risk assessment approach, and we look at the specific details, particularly those high risk areas. So I'm thinking roofs, balconies, wet areas, those sorts of areas, and say what's our response to this. So what are we reliant on to protect that particular element, and what's the backup if that's going to fail. So I think we've been quite reliant on what I call like a single point of failure protection to the timber. So it's some sort of membrane system that's applied to a floor beneath a wet area, and then there's tiles and showers, bath, whatever on top. But if that membrane for whatever reason has a defect in it, or if it fails, like those things aren't designed to last 60 years, the same as as a structural life of the building. So what happens when that fails? So where does the water go? Does it sit on top of the timber, or is it allowed to drain? Is there a sort of secondary mechanism there to help mitigate that risk? So I think that the way that we need to approach those areas is to always kind of be allowing for at least a kind of two levels of protection. That could be what I call passive measures. So membranes, paint on or applied, or in the case of duralam columns or something, a kind of a coating or a treatment, or some level of sort of protection that you place on the timber, and then you have active measures like moisture monitoring, whether that's sort of embedded sensors or a regular maintenance regime, and allowing for drainage. I think if you do get any kind of water leakage and overflow, one of the many benefits of CLT is it's a very solid monolithic sort of construction, high performance when it comes to air tightness and things as well. But that sort of works against us when it comes to water. So if you have a floor or that's got a membrane on that's leaks, it's quite hard for the water then to find its way out if you haven't kind of specifically designed it to be able to do that. So I've just been aware of projects both overseas and in Australia where they have had challenges where membranes haven't been installed properly or there've been leaks and the water can get onto the CLT, and if it's not able to drain, then it can stay there for a long time. It takes a long time for water to work its way through a 200 thick CLT floor slab. So it can be years before you start to know that there's a problem, and having those secondary levels of protection, I think, is going to be absolutely essential.
And a lot of these things are design issues and challenges that might everyone solves again and again and again from project to project, the same sort of issue. What's your thoughts on the development of like the idea of kit apart design methodology? It's been there since the start, like the old IKEA flat pack. You design it once and then you can just scale it out. Whole business models have been applied on this. Where are we at on this whole ideology, and are you seeing it improve or starting to be used, or are there certain things blocking this?
I think it's definitely something that we need to improve on. I think, we're seeing certain clients, particularly the kind of larger government clients, that are looking to try to standardize designs and delivery mechanisms for some of their projects. And, they have the capacity to solve some of these challenges and sort of roll them out and, create these robust measures. But, still, we're still at a stage where a lot of buildings are going to be one-offs. They're custom design. There's a new design team on every one. Even kind of a team that maybe had experience, you can't guarantee the same people that works on the last one are going to work on the new one. So it's often kind of learning again from scratch every project. I think the timber industry needs to kind of collaborate more, creating sort of libraries of robust details. Certainly the UK have sort of showed some leadership in this space in developing some of these sorts of industry standard details that have been peer reviewed, that have been used, that have been shown to be kind of robust and things. So I think we need to do a better job at collating some of those. I think a lot of people are kind of particularly the early adopters have probably invested a lot of time and effort into coming up with different ways of dealing with these issues and developing details and strategies. And everyone's always kind of reluctant to share those learnings because they've invested a lot of time to get there. But I think collectively as an industry, certainly this moisture space, like we need to start collating some of that stuff and to making that more easily available, particularly for those new adopters and less experienced teams, because we can't afford to wait for everyone to make mistakes to learn this stuff. Like we need to do that collectively.
Well said. But yeah, Nick, I've probably asked this a few times, but what do you see as the future of the industry? Where is it going? Blue sky. What's the positive future that we can look forward to from your perspective?
Yeah, I think, look, certainly in the moisture space, I definitely think there are some really, really smart products coming out and really smart solutions to this. I don't think it's, I try not to be too doom and gloom over this. There are challenges.
You're very realistic. It's you need a signal. You need to point to something that if it's overlooked, it's overlooked. So it's awesome.
I think there are, like I said, there are newer systems, newer solutions coming online. There are some, certainly some businesses that are, have a lot more solutions in those sort of value add products for CLT. I think, I like to see the industry itself and some of the suppliers sort of take a little bit more of kind of leading role in sort of recommending and offering some of those services just to help protect their products. And so I think there's definitely work to be done there, and there's a lot of really good information out there. A lot of good membrane suppliers, timber treatments, coatings and that sort of stuff, and those guys will happily talk to you and provide you advice and things on that. And I think it's incumbent on engineers and architects and things to be having those conversations and make sure that their designs and specifications are robust enough to deal with the sort of weather that Australia can sometimes throw at these projects. So I think there's definite positive aspects there. But I think in general, I'm always really keen to sort of normalize mass timber to a point where it's we don't talk about mass timber buildings. We don't talk about them being a sort of specialized, unusual, or somehow risky. It just becomes kind of part of the construction language. So we build a building. Does it make sense to use timber here? If it does, then let's use it. Let's put more timber into more buildings. Let's build hybrids. Let's use it in the right places. We don't need to be particularly precious if it's mass timber or lightweight framing. I think there's certainly some incredible opportunities, I think, to combine some of those together if we can we can get the two sides of the supply chain talking to each other. I really just kind of want mass timber in particular to just sort of be this this material that everyone's kind of comfortable and familiar with using, and it doesn't need to be seen as a complex or risky element. It's the right material for the right job, which is always something I've been trying to preach as an engineer.
100%. Well, it's a great note to end it on, Nick. If people want to find out more about yourself and Arbораlis, where should they go?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm usually a pretty prolific poster on LinkedIn. So search for Nick Hewson on LinkedIn, or you can visit my website, www.arbораlis.com.au. That's ARBORALIS. That's actually Latin for relating to trees. So that's why.
I actually never knew. I never asked you that. There you go. It's a nice one.
So please kind of get in touch if you want to talk anything related to timber, anything's related to moisture. Always very passionate and interested to hear about experiences in that space. So thank you.